Welcome everyone to ECRI's 2024 Legislative Coffee Hour. We're so glad to see so many of you here with us today. My name is Amanda Barker. I am a VP of Policy for the Environment Council of Rhode Island, along with Peter Trafton, who does a lot of our awesome behind-the-scene work, so thank you, Peter. I'm also the policy advocate at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Environment Council of Rhode Island, ECRI is an umbrella organization for over 60 of Rhode Island's environmental advocacy groups. Coffee Hour is an event that we hold every year to give environmental advocates and legislators a chance to interact, to celebrate wins from last year, and discuss emerging priorities for this year's session. It's an opportunity for our advocates to work with legislators, as well as for our legislators to hear a bit about some of Rhode Island's most pressing environmental issues and the solutions that Rhode Island's environmental community is advocating for. Today on the agenda, we have a speaking program that includes ECRI President James Crowley, House Speaker Joe Shekarchi, Chair of the Senate Environment Committee Alana DiMario, and Professor and Director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, Dr. Kim Cobb. Our speaking program will be about 40 minutes, so that we can reserve some time for advocates and legislators to speak to each other directly and discuss environmental priorities. To say a little more about ECRI and our legislative priorities, I'm now going to introduce James Crowley, who is president of ECRI, as well as an attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation. So with that, I'll turn it over to James.
Hi everyone. Thanks Amanda, and thank you to our speakers, our elected officials, and everyone who took the time to join us here today. As Amanda said, my name is James Crowley. I'm an attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation, and I'm currently serving as the president of ECRI. ECRI is a coalition of more than 60 small, medium, and large organizations, as well as individual members, that share a mission to develop and advocate for policies and laws that protect and enhance the environment for all Rhode Islanders. ECRI is the organization through which Rhode Island's environmental advocates come together to speak with one voice, and that includes voting on and advocating for our collective legislative priorities each year. In recent years, ECRI and our members have played a key role in supporting the passage of several major pieces of environmental legislation, including the Act on Climate in 2021 and the 100% Renewable Energy Standard in 2022. In last year's legislative session, we prioritized and successfully worked to support the passage of important legislation, including solar siting reform and updates to the state building code. In a little while, Amanda is going to discuss ECRI's emerging priorities for the 2024 session, including legislation necessary to fulfill the promise of the Act on Climate. We hope you'll join us again at the State House in a couple of months for our Earth Day event, by which time we'll have an official list of our 2024 priorities for this session to discuss with you all. In addition to the advocacy that ECRI and our members do here at the State House, we also produce publications including our biannual Green Report Card, which grades the General Assembly and its members on their environmental accomplishments and votes over the past 2 years. And our most recent Green Report Card, published in 2022, we were able to celebrate, quote, the best 2 years of environmental policy making in Rhode Island history. I'll note that Speaker Shekarchi and Chair DiMario, as well as Senate President Ruggiero, earned A+ marks in 2022. Our next Green Report Card will come out this summer. I'll also mention that ECRI is currently working to implement our equity-based strategic plan, which includes ongoing work to amend our bylaws and orient ourselves to better support environmental justice work. At this point, I'd like to introduce Speaker Shekarchi. Speaker Shekarchi is entering his 4th year as Speaker, and under his leadership, we've seen some really critical environmental legislation move successfully through the House and eventually be signed into law. Chief among these is the Act on Climate, which is really the most important piece of environmental legislation signed into law in Rhode Island in recent memory. We thank Speaker Shekarchi for his championing of that bill, among others, and at this point, I'll turn it over to the Speaker.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you. Director Gray, always a pleasure to see Terry, the steward of the environment in Rhode Island. He does such a great job. I certainly want to acknowledge Jim Crowley, the president of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island, and Amanda Barker as well. And thank you all, everybody, for being here today. I have some prepared remarks, but before I do, I just want to recognize my colleagues who are with me here from the House. I know you're going to hear from the Senate side in a minute, but my good friend, Lita Blazajewski, and I appreciate all the kind things that Jim said. None of that happens. None of that happens without Chris Blazajewski, who manages the floor and does it so well. That's exactly right. Let me tell you something. If anybody thinks that the Act on Climate was an easy bill to pass now, it absolutely wasn't. And we were on the floor, and it was one of the first big pieces of legislation I ever did in my life as Speaker. And we were all under masks, and we were at the auditorium. We were all separate. It was a foreign environment, and we were on iPads. And the iPads were running out of energy. We had that's a true story. We had a 3-hour battery life with the iPads. And we were at literally with 5 or 10 minutes to go. And the Republicans, no disrespect to any of them who are here, I don't think there are any, but that's okay, but were filibustering because it was the day before the break. They wanted to go to the break. They were trying to build up opposition among the different advocacy groups against it. And I called a recess, and I called Chris up, and I said, Lita, what are we going to do? He says, we're going to call the question. And what that means is we end debate. And we never really like to do that, but that issue and this issue and the environment was so important that we made the decision, even as a new speaker and a new leader. He wasn't leader before, and I was never speaker before, but we wanted this to happen. And it meant so much to so many people, but it was the right thing to do that we called the question. We've never called the question since then. We've had some really far out there debates, but we let the process play on because we wanted this. It was important for the state, and it's important for the future of generations of Rhode Islanders. And I'm proud of that day, and I'm proud of that moment, and I want to acknowledge Chris Blazajewski for that, because not many people know the little intricacies of making the sausage, but he made it happen, and it doesn't happen without his guidance. So, Chris, thank you for that. Of course, yeah. Of course, I can't, you talk about the Act on Climate. You can't talk about the Act on Climate without finishing and saying Lauren Carson. Lauren Carson, who, yes, has championed that for many years. She has been outstanding. I remember going to the press conference that a couple of days, this was in February, the governor was considering a veto, and Lauren went in, and the governor ultimately signed it, and then after we signed it, we had this great celebration. We were down in Newport, and it was February, but it was a beautiful day. It was warm, the sun came out, we did it on the harbor, and we talked about Lauren, not only about this bill, but her lifetime of commitment to the environment. Well beyond that, you people know at the State House, she has been a strong advocate for that. Of course, Deb Filella, Terry Cortravan, the author of the Shoreline Access Bill, Michelle McGaugh, Jen Boylan, Mia Ackerman, Bob Phillips, Deb Filella, Chairman Bennett, who does a fine job chairing the Environmental Committee. And David would say to me, Speaker, I've been chairman of the Environmental Committee for I don't know how many years, 4 years, 5 years. I've never passed a bill. So I said, well, we're going to change that. So we've passed a lot of good bills, and David's done a phenomenal job. So it is a great opportunity. I'm so proud of my House colleagues and the work that they do, and they do it with such passion. And we're going to hear, which is unusual. Usually when you hear, in committees we hear bills. I'm bringing the director in. We're bringing Terry Gray in. We get our own report card. And I want to thank you, Jim. I never got an A+ on anything, so I'm happy about that. I hope I get one this year. It's an election year. Of course, there's Jed Thorpe as well. So thank you, guys. Rhode Island is leading the way on environmental initiatives, and advocates are calling from the best years of environmental policy making in Rhode Island history. That is thanks in large part to the work of all of you, the people who are here today, who have tremendous advocates for the environment. The Act on Climate passed in 2021 requires the state to create a plan to reduce emissions to levels that will help us avoid the worst consequences of rising temperature and sea levels. And let me tell you, I live in Warwick and I see sea levels. Warwick has more coastline than any other city and town in the state of Rhode Island. This Chairwoman McEntee also just arrived. It's a national model for protecting the environment, addressing climate change, and creating new, good-paying green jobs in Rhode Island. Last year, we passed a comprehensive plan for the future of solar development in our state. June Speakman, I don't know if she's here, but June Speakman led that effort after 2 years of hard work. Yes, we can have solar and we can protect forests at the same time with a little bit of planning and a little bit of hard work, and June did that. She does a phenomenal job on our Affordability Committee for Housing. Reforming our net metering and renewable energy growth program to expand solar development while protecting forests, creating well-paying jobs, and stabilizing the cost for taxpayers. We also clarified and enacted shoreline access. I mentioned Terry Cortravan, 3 years of hard work in a study commission. Terry Cortravan proved, and the two commissioners, that a study commission is not where you go for a bill to die. It's where you go for a bill to become the best possible model and pass. And Terry did that and did it very well. We banned restaurants from using polystyrene foam, which is commonly called styrofoam, for food packaging. On January 1st, a statewide ban went into effect on single-use plastic bags. That's building upon the work of the previous few years, and we will pass legislation to make Rhode Island first in the state and the country to build deep water wind resources. We have the the earliest renewable growth for the state in the country, faster than California, faster than Massachusetts, 2033. That's amazing. And last year, we have funded and we continue to fund the EC4. We have created a funding mechanism to make it happen. I see Terry Gray nodding his head because we continue to fund positions and asks from him as well. We're going to take a good hard look at the green bond and make sure it's a little bit greener if we can make it. It's a good thing. We have established a commission to ensure that the CRMC has the resources and structure to be as effective as possible. We funded and created and forced CRMC to name a hearing officer. We're going to continue to modify and improve that to make it as best as possible. I'm incredibly proud of all of these accomplishments, but we can't stop. We cannot stop now. As the ocean state, we're already seeing the impact of climate change and sea level rise. Don't have to believe me. Look at the storms the last 30 days that we've had. 2 major storm events, and they're coming more frequently, and they're coming more ferociously. Let's not forget that. We're going to continue to move the needle forward, legislatively, collectively, but we in the General Assembly cannot do it alone. We need your help. We need your advocacy at every level of government. We need to continue in our local cities and towns where there's a lot of resistance to change. And what I say is push harder. Don't give up. It's too important. We need to look at environmental not only as a state issue, but as a federal issue and as our local city and town issues. We're going to continue to do that. We need partners like all of you to weigh in, to advocate, and to make yourselves heard. And with that, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to tell you that I look forward to Earth Day. I look forward for my report next year, my grade. I hope it's an election year, and I hope, Jim, I hope you listen to me. I hope I get an A+ next year. We're going to continue as we have in the past. So I can tell you, and of course, Teresa Tanzi has just arrived, and I think there's Rebecca Kislak in the back. I can't see with the mask, but if I have missed anybody, it's because you came in late, and I'm sorry, but thank you all for being here. And of course, Deputy Whip Ackerman has joined us from the movie business, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Speaker Shekarchi. Next, I would like to introduce Chair DiMario. Senator DiMario is in her second term as chair of the Senate Environment and Agriculture Committee, and she has quickly distinguished herself as an environmental champion, introducing important legislation aimed at reducing emissions from vehicles, responsibly siting solar, and reducing building emissions. With that, Chair DiMario.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Senate President Ruggiero and the Rhode Island Senate, I am so privileged to be here with you today. I do want to acknowledge my Senate colleagues who have joined us today. I know I saw Senator Valverde. I just saw Senator Coleman come in. Hello. I saw Senator Ujifusa. Hi over there. I believe I saw Senator Miller. Hello, Senator Miller. Yes. Hello, Senator Felag. If any of my other Senate colleagues are here, if you want to raise your hand, I'd be happy to give you a shout out as well, because I am here as the chair chair of, oh, Senator Zurier, there you are. You sat down, claimed a seat, smart one. So I am here as the chair of the Senate Committee on Environment and Agriculture, and it is my job to not only put forth environmental related legislation that I think is important, but also to make sure to lift up and to help work through the issues that my colleagues put forward and to make sure that we pass those as well. And I think that is almost even more significant than some of the bills that I've had the privilege to sponsor. I am sorry that Speaker Shekarchi has already left, because I just wanted to acknowledge him as well. And to also say that it is always a challenge to follow him, because he always hits on the most important points and gives a shout out to the most key things that we have done. I do want to reiterate some of those. In the last few years, with the leadership of Senate President Ruggiero, Majority Leader Pearson, my colleague, Senate Judiciary Chair Don Oyer, we have passed a lot of truly historic legislation. The Act on Climate, as was mentioned, was a historic thing to have done in 2021. President Ruggiero's 100% renewable energy standard, the action to address lead hazards in water pipes and homes, the Plastic Waste Reduction Act, the legislation on offshore wind procurement, addressing forever chemicals and PFAS in drinking water and food packaging, banning polystyrene foam in food packaging, and much more. I also just want to acknowledge that one of the reasons why I believe Speaker Shekarchi and the Majority Leader needed to leave, and where some of our colleagues are today, is that this is the time of the session when we have a lot of competing events going on. And across the hall right now is the Right from the Start campaign. And they are talking about their priority legislation to get the children of Rhode Island off to the best and most healthy possible start in life. And, so I wanted to make that remark about, we have these kind of competing things for our attention. But I also just wanted to draw our attention to the fact that the reality is that these priorities are actually not so much competing as they are complementary. So if we're thinking about what I think, one of our biggest priorities is this year on the environmental front, being able to pass Chair Oyer and Representative Alzate's Environmental Justice Act. And then I think about the fact that the conversation happening across the hall is to make sure that we have healthcare coverage continuously for children from age 0 to 6 to help them with chronic conditions such as asthma, which we know happens more in communities that are overburdened by pollution, which the Environmental Justice Act would help us to be able to address. I just want to call our attention to the fact that as we advocate for our environmental priorities this year, that we want to make sure to be looking around and connecting with the ways that those priorities are very much in line with the priorities around children's health, as we're looking at issues of coastal resiliency and the damage that our communities, especially mine, I represent a coastal community in Narragansett, North Kingstown, and New Shoreham, the devastation that those storms that we just had a couple of weeks ago, we're still trying to quantify and figure out what the path forward there is. When we're talking about environmental issues related to resiliency and coastal resiliency, those things are very much connected with the strength of our economy here in Rhode Island, and we have to be paying attention to that as we're advocating for these changes. Again, as we're kind of torn in a lot of different directions right now, I just want to really challenge us all to look at these things as not being competing priorities, but again, as being ways that we can join with each other and figure out how we can move these things forward for the health and future of all Rhode Islanders. Thank you. And now I will go back to my nicely prepared remarks to make sure that I give recognition and thanks to the Environmental Council of Rhode Island and its member organizations, which are so important and which are really crucial in giving us this forum here today to speak. And I also look forward to hearing from Professor Kim Cobb about the case for urgent action on climate, as well as hearing more about ECRI's priorities for this session. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chair DiMario. Next, I want to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Kim Cobb, who is the director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society. Dr. Cobb is a climate researcher who uses past and present climate data to study future climate change impacts, with a focus on climate extremes and coastal flooding. Today, she is going to present to us on the case for urgent climate action in Rhode Island. Please welcome Dr. Cobb.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And I want to thank ECRI for the invitation to speak with you guys today. This is one of the first introductions to this amazing community of advocates and doers in the state of Rhode Island, because I'm new here. I've been here about 18 months. I took this position from 18 years at Georgia Tech. So, working on climate change down there to working on climate change up here is a little different, but a lot of lessons learned. And one thing I do know is that it does take this community working together every single day in a sustained and collaborative way to move things across the threshold to action in reality. So thank you for your work to date, and I hope to be a part of this community for many, many years to come. So get in touch, email me, and figure out how we might be able to work together. So I want to start with what we know about where we are with the climate crisis and where we're going in the very near term, like next year. And so this is a graph from the UK Met Office just showing how exceptional 2023 is turning out to be with respect to, of course, a new global temperature record, which is now becoming a broken record, literally almost every single year. And 2024 has a greater than 50% chance at being another record temperature year. And so this is very sobering, even for those of us who stare at these things all the time, and really helps us understand that we may be actually entering a period of accelerating climate change relative to the last decade. And this is just compiled by NOAA. This is the New York Times billion-dollar damage events hit at an all-time high in 2023. And we all saw this in the headlines. We know this intuitively. But NOAA compiling this into 28 such events last year to the tune of $200 billion or so a year of consistent hits to our economy as a nation. And here in Rhode Island, of course, I mean, the speaker was talking about the horrors that we've all lived through in our state. When I first got to Rhode Island last fall, I was driving my kids. I have 4 kids, driving them around in my car, and all of a sudden I couldn't pass a piece of road because there was 2 feet of water on the road. This was those horrible, I think it was September floods when the I-95 was completely covered, right? And so that was my wake-up call to what we've all come to learn as a fairly frequent occurrence in our state with respect to the prospect of extreme rainfall, and the National Weather Service in Boston labeling this last September event a 1 in 200 year event. So I don't really know how you have a 1 in 200 year event so frequently, but this is our present reality under continued global warming and climate change. And this is what we see in the data as well. I just wanted to help you connect the dots here in case you need to see it. This is from the 5th National Climate Assessment. And let me just stop and make a plug for those of you who are eager to connect the dots. This is the Connecting the Dot handbook for us right now. They have a special Northeastern section. They're talking about the problems, but they're also talking about the solutions that are happening. And they call out the Providence Resilient Partnership, amongst other efforts in the state, to help people understand what's going on with this crisis. But obviously, 100% increase in the days where we have 5 inches or more of rainfall, and that trend is very clear, and we understand why it's occurring, and we understand that it's going to continue to batter the northeastern U.S. in particular, and it's already baked in the data, and it's going to be getting much worse. Now, 2023, it's not just extreme rainfall. This is pulled from a compilation from WPRI. I'm just showing some of the crazy statistics to come of our shared lived experience from the last year. And so we have one of the top wettest years on record. We have one of the warmest years on record, and then a whole host of extremes that have been broken, landing us in the top 10 kind of worst climate extreme years in the history of Rhode Island. And this last one is interesting. We had our first EF2 tornado in Rhode Island, since 1986. And this is a big question mark in the literature around the links to global warming for that piece. But all the rest of these have been conclusively linked to the changing physics of our climate system. And we all probably know this in the room, but just for the general public to try to help them connect the dots between what you are working on in their daily lives, a year like 2023 certainly puts an exclamation mark on the importance of the work that you are doing. So we heard the call to connect the dots to the priorities economically, to the health priorities, to the equity and justice priorities, and I would add to the national security priorities, which are together an incredible bipartisan basket that is far enough away justification for going as aggressively as we can towards those no regrets win-win solutions, some of which I'll touch on. But obviously, these are not just on the threat column, this is in the opportunity space as well. So we think about childhood asthma, we think about environmental justice communities that are been burdened by fossil fuel infrastructures for decades. We talk about the economic opportunities of Rhode Island being a leader in low carbon technologies and systems. We talk about the national security opportunities with Rhode Island intimately tied to, of course, the defense industry and our readiness as a nation. So these are talking points that we can be leaning into, and I know many of us already are, in thinking about this particular landscape this particular year as well. And so the way I think about it is this sweet spot that exists between lowering emissions, which is on the bottom left, right? Yeah, you guys too. The bottom right, which is adaptation resilience, and we think about climate action traditionally in those two spheres. But I'm happy to hear all the talk about the environmental justice angles and the ways in which this is also an important aspect of climate solutions when we think about this holistically. And so we can think about these sweet spots that exist that can actually help us achieve all three things at once. And this is where you can lean into the Justice 40 kinds of initiatives. You can lean into what Providence already has, which is our climate justice plan, right, which is a scaffold for action that identifies and lifts up some of the community priorities in these spaces. So I'm getting to know that plan intimately, and I'm not going to go into all those things there, but they were mentioned as some of the key priorities and recent wins on the one hand, and continued priorities on the other for leaning into this nexus, this triple win nexus that we can be leading on in Rhode Island. And by the way, this is where much of the federal money is raining into these spaces right now as well. So leaning into this positions us well to take advantage of Inflation Reduction Act funding and elsewise. Wouldn't be here if I didn't actually, of course, mention the work that Brown is doing, the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society specifically. And we have a new strategic plan that is focused on engaging solutions research in partnership with stakeholders in our backyard. So I wanted to call out some of those projects quickly before I turn it over back to the program. But one of the things I love to lift up is this program called Breathe Providence, which is a program to put low-cost air quality sensors into low-income, overburdened neighborhoods that are overexposed to fossil fuel emissions and their contaminants, and work with community partners to co-develop the network and the solutions that might come out of this data-driven, evidence-based policymaking. So this is an extremely wonderful project that really highlights the nexus between reducing emissions on the one hand and environmental justice outcomes and priorities on the other hand, with a very big focus on health. And this is where Brown has a unique strength, by the way. As we start to think about the climate and health nexus, Brown has a public health school that's international leading. It has a med school to lean on as a resource for Rhode Island in thinking about the climate and health nexus. This is another project I wanted to mention. I'm sorry, the text is getting a little blurred there, but this is brand new. This is focused on the other side of the equation, which is adaptation resilience. But you'll see on this bottom part here, there's still a strong focus on community health. And so this is what's coming out of our innovation and research at Brown. And this is a first of a very large partnership that we hope to build out in the coastal resilience space with University of Rhode Island, Roger Williams, Rhode, of course, leading a massive $50 million plus effort to land a focus on climate resilience in Rhode Island. And Brown is honored and happy to be a part of these efforts and working with our partners across the state and the region as well. I could take questions on this if you're interested, but I wanted to highlight one more piece, which is an umbrella for all of these projects to thrive. and a platform that invites sustained partnership and engagement from folks in this room and in this building to help advance climate solutions in Providence, in Rhode Island, and across New England. It's called Equitable Climate Futures. It was just green-lighted at Brown, and it's a cross-campus initiative, so I'm happy to be the spokesperson, but I am one of many, and it rests on 4 pillars. You've heard me talk about that climate and health piece. We're going to be stitching together new ways of thinking about this work at Brown: climate impacts and risk assessment, climate policy and economics, and climate communication, storytelling, and narratives, which is becoming such a key part, as you all know, for climate solutions space. And we have a deep bench of hundreds of folks, of experts who are working eager to get involved in this. The key here is that if you're going to be part of this initiative at Brown, you have to bring an outside partner with you as part of your team. And academics are like, what did you just say? And this is a tough thing up there. But this is our effort to lay a foundation that we hope will be enduring and that we hope will be productive in moving the needle on climate solutions at Brown. I wanted to just take note of how fast our climate and energy bench is growing at Brown right now, not just at IBIS, which is just one circle on this chart, but across the entire campus. I would say we've probably tripled the number of climate and energy experts on campus in the last 5 years, and we're on pace to do so again in the next 5 years. And so this is a big push at Brown, and together with our colleagues at URI, Roger Williams, Providence College, and beyond, we believe that we have a unique capacity in this state to achieve our shared visions with public-private partnerships across the reach into academia. Any of these people would be thrilled to talk to any of you. And I think I just want to make that clear. So Google them, get in their inboxes, get in mine, and let's get to work. The last slide is really about what it means to partner in this moment and think about, from a climate scientist perspective, the thing that we have going for us here in Rhode Island is the Act on Climate, one of the boldest goals for climate action in the nation. We have the renewable goal, which is the boldest goal in the nation. And that's a big green check, right? We have set the bullseye on the wall, and we are going to go all in on that. Then you need the plan, and the plan is underway, and that takes time, and we get that. And then you need to implement the plan, right? So all of those things are necessary, but in this moment, they are not sufficient, right? And so what we need to do is think about moving to this bottom call, which reminds us that we are out of time, and that we can achieve these win-win-win objectives when we think about the sweet spots between emissions mitigation, adaptation resilience, and achieving our equity and environmental justice goals as a state. So when we stay in that spot, we can almost do no wrong in accelerating ourselves forward while we wait for the plan and the funding to achieve our goals in 2033 and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cobb, for that message. And that message is exactly why we're here today discussing our emerging priorities. Before I get into our priorities, I want to just stress that this is a preliminary list of priorities, and ECRI will be voting on our formal priorities in the coming months and be announcing them formally at our Earth Day event in April. We do have copies of our emerging priorities in the back in case anyone is interested. And I just want to highlight our top 4 emerging priorities this afternoon. It'll come as no surprise that several of our emerging priorities have to do with achieving our Act on Climate goals. The passage of the Act on Climate 3 years ago was a major achievement, and we thank the General Assembly for passing that act. With that being said, the Act on Climate is not self-executing. Now the state must follow up with the programs and policies necessary to achieve those emissions reductions targets. Thankfully, we know what we need to do to decarbonize these sectors and achieve those targets. We just need to implement the policies to get us there. That is why top priority area number 1 is decarbonizing buildings. Currently, Rhode Island lacks a comprehensive policy to address emissions from the building sector, which make up almost a third of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. That's why ECRI will be advocating for legislation to reduce emissions for both existing buildings and new construction. but I want to stress that existing buildings are the larger piece of the puzzle. When we talk about achieving net zero by 2050, 70% of our building stock that is already in place today will still be in place in 2050. So it's crucial that we start retrofitting and electrifying those buildings now. Our second priority area is funding RIPTA. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Rhode Island. And a key way to reduce those emissions is to reduce vehicle miles traveled and get people out of their personally owned vehicles. RIPTA must be adequately funded to not only prevent the fiscal cliff and service cuts, but to increase driver pay and to allow them to start implementing the transit master plan and expand service in order to create a more robust public transit system and reduce emissions. Our third priority area is environmental justice. We know that the effects of climate change and other environmental problems are not born equally. Low-income communities, particularly communities of color, bear disproportionate burdens of pollution. And a major cause of that is the fact that those communities have not been heard when it comes to environmental planning and siting. ECRI will be supporting legislation that ensures that environmental justice is considered when state agencies make important decisions around siting, implementation of the Act on Climate, and other topics. ECRI will also be supporting a percentage of income payment plan, or PIP, to limit the economic burden of utility bills on these already overburdened communities. Our fourth priority area is funding climate action. We're calling on both the General Assembly and the Governor's administration to make sure that the environmental and climate action are appropriately funded, and to ensure that they're not leaving any federal funding on the table that will help establish the programs necessary to achieve the Act on Climate. I want to stress that we know what we need to do to address climate change. And as Dr. Cobb presented, there are numerous opportunities that come along with addressing climate change. We just need to increase the funding and staff capacity to implement the solutions necessary. We hope you will join us in advocating for climate and environmental justice policy this session. Before we wrap up, I want to thank all of the legislators and government officials who have taken the time to join us here today. We spotted several of you in the crowd. Thank you to Director Terry Gray, Director of DEM, some members of the AG's office, Allison Carney and Nick Voss. From the Senate, Senator Valverde, Senator Zurier, Senator DiMario, Senator Miller, Senator Filag, Senator Coleman, and Senator Ujifusa. From the House, Representative Boylan, Rep. Falella, Rep. Carson, Chair Bennett, Speaker Shekarchi, Leader Blazajewski, Rep. McGaw, Rep. Courtfriend, Rep. Dawson, Rep. Ackerman, Rep. Phillips, Representative McEntee, Representative Tanzi, Rep. Kislak, Rep. Cruz, and Rep. Knight. And I also want to acknowledge Priscilla De La Cruz, who is the chair of the Sustainability Department at the City of Providence. Thank you all for being here. I'd once again like to thank our speakers for joining us today, Speaker Shekarchi, Chair DiMario, Dr. Kim Cobb, as well as ECRI President James Crowley, and the other folks at ECRI who helped make this event a success. I also want to mention that ECRI will be holding its Lobby Day event here at the State House on the afternoon of April 31st, at which we'll be formally announcing our legislative priorities, and we hope you'll join us for that event as well. That's the end of our speaking program. We encourage you to stay, enjoy some coffee, and talk about environmental priorities to make this session a success. Thank you all very much.